I know for some of you, that scene you just watched, it's like your worst nightmare. You would rather be anywhere else, doing anything else, other than having to sit with a friend or a family member, someone you love, and have a conversation like that. And I get it. Because some of you have tried to have conversations like that, tough conversations, and they didn't go so well. And they didn't end up the way that you'd hope they would end up. And that's why I'm so glad that you're here for week 4 in this series that we've called Adulting. If you're just joining in with us, we've been doing a deep dive into the topic of spiritual maturity. And what we've discovered is something that your parents probably told you growing up, and it's this, that you can grow old and not grow up. In other words, you can be an adult and still not act like one. And we've been discovering that the same thing is true with spiritual development. You can be a Christian for a long, long time and still not act like a Christian. In other words, you can do a lot of Christian things and at the end of the day still wind up not being any more like Jesus than when you started doing all those Christian things. And Jesus, we found out, he set the bar for what a spiritual adult is supposed to look like, what a spiritual adult does. And Jesus made it really, really simple. Jesus said that spiritual adults love God and love people. More specifically, they love people that are, well, really not that easy to love. And Jesus said that that kind of love could just sort of become who you are. It could flow out of the core of your being. And God's plan for making that happen for you and for me, it's not a set of rules, it's not a set of practices, although those are good and they can be helpful to you. But God's plan for us is that we would stay connected to Jesus in such a way that His life or His way of life would just become integrated with ours and then flow out of us towards the people around us. The image that Jesus used was like a vine and some branches. And Jesus is the vine, we're the branches. And if we can stay connected to Him, then Jesus' love, Jesus' life would flow from Him into us, into our lives, and become so much a part of us, down at the core of who we are, that it would just flow out of us into the world around us, into the people around us, and we would grow up to become spiritual adults. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been specifically looking at what are some things that get in the way of that? What are some things that wind up disconnecting us from the source of life, from Jesus? The stuff that keeps us from growing into emotional adults, spiritual adults. And the thing I want to talk to you about today is such a big, big deal. In fact, I was just telling Ed, our senior pastor, the other day as I was preparing this talk, I think we could take this one topic and break it up into about 4 or 5 pieces, and we could have a series just on this topic. And I tell you why this is such a big deal, because most of us are really, really bad at this. But here's the problem. Most of us think we're doing it the right way. What I'm going to talk to you about, we think this is exactly how Christians ought to act, how Christians ought to be, and a lot of times we wind up doing the exact opposite of what a Christ follower should do. And it starts, I think, with a misunderstanding of something that Jesus said, and I'll read it to you. Here's what Jesus said. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Now, when most of us read that verse, here's what we think. Jesus is encouraging His followers to just keep everybody calm. Make sure nobody's offended. Make sure nobody's feelings get hurt. Make sure there's no yelling and everybody's at peace. And then no matter what, it may mean you have to overlook some things. It may mean that you have to ignore some bad behavior. But you know what? That's okay, because whatever you need, whatever you have to do, by all means, keep it peaceful. Keep everybody calm. And most Christians wind up placing this really high value on keeping the peace. And let me say this real clear. Don't get me wrong. Peace is a good thing. I mean, the way of Jesus is the way of peace between people. That's true. But in the pursuit of peace, what often happens is we wind up being really bad at resolving conflict with each other. And it all comes in the interest of peace. See, most Christians wind up avoiding conflict out of the fear that it might lead to, well, disrupting the peace. And that's how we justify it. We convince ourselves that I'm avoiding this conflict because I want to be a peacemaker. I want to keep the peace between me and these people that I'm dealing with. And in reality, we're not keeping the peace. What actually we're keeping is, well, it's a false peace. What most of us Christians wind up holding on to is we become false peacemakers and not true peacemakers. Because, see, peace out of fear, peace at any cost, that's not real peace. Again, it's a false peace. I'll give you some examples. Let's say your wife, she comes home late every night, and she doesn't call. She's not courteous enough to give you a reason, and you're upset about that, and you should be upset about that. But you don't say anything. You don't do anything about it. Well, maybe you do the passive-aggressive thing. You give her the cold shoulder, but you don't address the issue, and you're becoming a false peacemaker. Or how about this? Maybe you're engaged, and you get the feeling that maybe you need to slow the relationship down a little bit. Maybe there's some issues that you need to work out, and the wedding's coming up fast, and you just need more time. But you don't say anything. Why? Because your fiance's family, they're already planning the date. They got the date set. They're planning the wedding. Everything's on track, and everybody's headed down that road, and you don't say anything. You just keep quiet, and you go ahead and dive in, and you're just hoping for the best. And you've become a false peacemaker. Or maybe you dread every holiday, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving because your parents are coming over to your house and you know what's going to happen. Every time they come over, it's always negative. They always criticize everything. They criticize the way you cook. They criticize the way you clean. They criticize the way you raise your kids and the way you keep your house. And it's just all negative all the time. And it's hurtful and it's not productive. But you just keep your mouth shut and you just take it every single time. And you think you're doing that in the interest of just keeping from there being an argument. You're keeping the peace, but it's not real peace. It's a false peace. Or maybe you're hanging out with your friends at dinner and the topic changes to that friend who's not with you at that dinner, and it becomes nothing good. It's all gossip. It's all slander. It's all jealousy and criticism. And you feel like you ought to say something and stand up for your friend, but you don't. You laugh along, or you nod your head, or you just go along with it because you don't want to kill the atmosphere. You don't want to disagree. You don't want to stick up for that friend, and you're just creating false peace. Or how about this? You're having dinner with a family member or a friend, someone you care about, and they're so excited to tell you the news about how they're about to go out and get a brand new car. They're going to get rid of theirs, and they're going to get a brand new one, a bigger one, a better one, a more expensive one. And the whole time you're thinking during this dinner in the back of your mind, but your credit is shot, and you just bought that car a year ago, and you owe more on that thing than it's worth. And all of these things are going through in your head, but here's what you say. Oh, good for you. I'm so happy for you. Go for it. And the dinner goes great, but it's false peace. And see, people who are emotionally mature, who are spiritually mature, they're not content with the false peace. And I'll tell you why. Because true peacemakers are the kind of peacemakers that Jesus was talking about when he said that, blessed are the peacemakers. True peace never comes by pretending that wrong things are right. That's not peace. True peacemakers, they love God and they love other people so much that they are willing to disrupt a false peace for the sake of what they know is right, because they are working toward true peace. I mean, that's what Jesus did. I mean, when Jesus went into the temple one time and he discovered that there were people there swindling people out of money, taking other people's money for the sake of their religion, getting rich off of poor people, and doing it by using religion, Jesus didn't settle for that peace. He disrupted it. He turned their tables over. He scattered the money. He kicked them out of the temple, their place of worship, because he wasn't going to stand for that. He wasn't going to keep a false peace. You know, one of the most controversial statements that Jesus ever made, it's something that we often shy away from, and people use this to discredit Jesus a lot of times. But Jesus really did say this. I'll read it to you. He said, "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are going to be the members of his own household." And people read that and they think, wow, how could Jesus say that? I mean, he's Jesus. How could he say that? Well, it's simple. Because Jesus understood that the consequences of this real, authentic, mature kind of love that his followers were going to live in, this kind of love doesn't just sit by quietly when something's wrong and just hope it gets better. No. this kind of love jumps into the fray. It enters into the conflict, and it makes the wrong things right. And so Jesus just knew that that kind of love was going to drive a wedge, possibly, between some friends, between some family members. Now, let me be clear. Jesus isn't advocating violence here. He isn't advocating that there be conflict between people. He's not excusing anything like that. He's just stating a fact. He's saying that, look, true peace, sometimes it divides, but true peace, it's worth struggling for. It's worth fighting for, because a false peace, it's not going to get better if you just ignore it. No, it never does. Why? Because that kind of a peace, it's based on lies. It's not based in the truth. And see, the way of Jesus is always based in the truth, because the way of Jesus is the way of truth. But the sad part of all of this is that a lot of Christ followers, a lot of us Christians, we live our lives every day, and we're carrying around this inward conflict that's unresolved inside of our hearts. And we hate it. We know it's not right. We know it ought to change. But we don't say anything because we're afraid. Because we think to say something is going to upset peace. But we don't realize that what we're holding on to is not peace. At least it's not true peace. It's a counterfeit peace. It's this peace on the outside that looks like peace, but on the inside I'm having this war of emotions going on, all this conflict. And what I'm doing is I'm settling for false peace. And that is not what spiritual adults do. That's not how we live life. In fact, it's really a childlike way to do relationships. And we fool ourselves to think this is the loving thing to do, but it's actually the opposite of love. It's not loving to another person. Why? Because you're basically lying to them. You're not telling them the truth about what's going on in you. It's not loving to yourself because you're bottling up all these emotions that are doing damage to you. And it's also not loving to God because, again, it's not living in truth. So here's what I want to do for the rest of our time together. I want to give you some skills. I want to work on some steps, some practical steps that we can do to help us become true peacemakers. But I have to give you a warning, okay? It's about to get really, really fast and furious when it comes to information in here in just a moment, because I got a lot of stuff to go over with you. I got a lot of steps. I got a lot of practical things. But now I'll just tell you, it's going to be super practical. I mean, it's going to be so practical to probably make your head spin. And if you're a note taker, if you like to write down everything that I say or that comes up on the screen, God help you, because there's a lot of stuff for you to write down today, because it's a lot of information, but it's good stuff. There's real actions that you can begin to take, and it'll actually help you in your relationships if you put these into practice. This is very, very practical stuff. So fasten your seatbelts. We're going to do this fast. How do you become a true peacemaker? Well, here's the first thing. You have to speak honestly when you speak, when you have a conversation, and you have to listen openly. Because here's the key. If you're going to resolve conflict with another person, and you're going to fight for true peace, it always starts with a conversation. And by the way, let me just say this. A conversation is not had on text messages, okay? A conversation does not happen on Facebook. It doesn't happen on Instagram or any other social media. Conversations involve speaking to a person and listening to a person, okay? So that's what I mean when I say conversations. So don't get this wrong. Conversations are about speaking and listening. So let me give you some skills, and I'm going to start with the speaking side. When you're speaking in a conversation, you're having a tough conversation with a person, here's some things you need to remember. Number one, you need to start by using I statements and not you statements. You need to talk about what you're feeling, what you're thinking, how you're feeling hurt or disrespected, how you're upset, I don't understand. Use I statements. And you're thinking, well, isn't that selfish to use only I statements? Actually, no, because see, here's the difference. I statements express feelings, but as soon as you start making you statements, you're making accusations. You did this, and you always, and you never. But always start with I statements. See the difference? Number two. Use short sentences. Keep it brief, okay? You're not delivering a speech. You're not preaching a sermon. That's my job. Let me do that, okay? Keep it short. Number three, correct them if you think they've missed something. For example, when you're in conflict with somebody, say something like this. Look, I feel like maybe you don't understand how I'm feeling about this certain thing. Or I don't think you understand how what you say hurts me. I think maybe you intended to ignore me on this. It's something that you think maybe they didn't understand, and you just help them understand what they missed. Number four, You speak until you feel like you've been understood. See, a lot of us, we get into a conversation, we throw out our feelings, and then if they don't understand, we just go, see, you don't care, and then we walk away from the conversation. You can't do that. Say it again. Say it in a different way. Say what you're feeling until they get it, because, see, remember, they're not inside your head. They don't know what's going on in your heart, and it's our job when we're the speaker in the conversation to help them understand what's going on inside of us. Number 5. When you said what you need to say, you need to stop talking. Never miss a good opportunity to shut up, right? Because at some point, you've got to give them a chance to respond to you, to let you know that they've really heard what you have to say when you're in a tough conversation. And once they do, well, maybe you'll be surprised at what you hear back. So stop talking when you've said everything you need to say. Now, that's the speaking side of a tough conversation. But we all know there's 2 sides, all right? There's the speaking side, but then there's the listening side. And I think this one could be just as important. In fact, I think it's probably more important. So what are some skills you need to practice when you're the one on the receiving end, when you're listening? Number 1, you need to put aside your agenda. And this is so important. You need to be quiet. You need to be still. You need to look at the person who's speaking to you. Pay attention to their words. Pay attention to the emotion that they're expressing in that moment. And for whatever you do, don't be thinking about what your next line is, what you're going to say next. Because the moment you think about what you're going to say, how you're going to come back, you've stopped listening. Number 2, let them speak until they have finished a thought. See, we're so good at cutting people off. See, you hear somebody say something, you say, oh, I get what you're saying, and I know exactly what you're going to say, so let me say this. And we cut them off. You can't do that. You got to hear the entire thought, because there probably is more behind it than you think. Number 3, reflect their words back to them. And this is huge. This is so helpful. When somebody's expressing their feelings to you about something and you're in conflict with them, you need to say something like this. You need to say, hey, let me be sure that I understand you correctly. And then you paraphrase back to them what you heard them say. And then you wait and see what they say. If they say, no, that's not what I meant, then say, well, can you say it again? And then you parrot right back. You paraphrase what they said back to them until that person says, you know what? You understand. That's exactly what I meant. That's exactly what I was feeling. And see, the reason we do this is because sometimes resolving conflict with another person is it's not as much about the issue that you're having between you. It's really more about 2 people feeling like you've heard me and you understand me. And sometimes if you can just get that figured out, you can knock the conflict out right away. It's just an issue of hearing and understanding. Number 4, when the person speaking to you is done, you should ask them, hey, is there anything else you want to say to me? Is there more to this? See, this keeps us from getting in that situation where somebody walks away from a conversation and says, well, I didn't get my say in, or I didn't get to say everything I was feeling. No, you give them the opportunity. You say, hey, is there anything else you want me to know? Get it all out in the open. I'm inviting you. I want to know everything that's going on. And then finally, number 5, ask this question. Hey, of everything that we've talked about that you just shared with me in this conversation, what's the one thing that I need to remember? What's the one thing you want me to know more than anything else? And see, this will give you some action steps. This will give you something you can take with you and you can begin to put into practice. And probably it'll be something that you can do to keep the conflict from coming back and happening again. So that's how you listen. That's how you speak in a tough conversation. And believe it or not, all of that was point number 1. So let's go on to the next part, all right? There's more to conflict resolution. There's more to fighting for true peace. And here's the second thing. It's respect. It's such a key thing. And let me just say this. Respect is not a feeling. Okay? See, you can respect somebody regardless of how you feel about them. Because here's what respect comes down to. No matter how I feel about a person, I can always remember and I can always focus on the fact that this is a person made in the image of God who has unlimited, infinite worth and value, and I need to treat them that way. And see, I can treat someone as a fellow human being who has worth and value, whether I feel good or bad about them. I can treat them with respect. So just remember, respect has nothing to do with how you feel. But let's define it. What does respect mean? What does it look like practically? And I'm going to give you a list of exactly what respect looks like. And this is something you can take and you can put this like on a list and put it on your refrigerator. And this could be like the rules or how you deal with each other in your home. Or you can put this up in your workplace. And this is how we deal with each other on the job. This will change your relationships. Here it is. Here's what respect looks like. Respect means that I give myself and I give others the right to some things. Here's the first one. I give you the right to space and privacy. In other words, I knock before I come into your room or your workspace. I don't use your stuff without asking. I give you your space. I respect your space and your privacy. Number 2, you have the right to be different. In other words, you don't have to like what I like. You don't have to think the way I think. You don't have to spend time the way I do. Number 3, you have the right to disagree, and I have the right to disagree with you. In other words, we make room for each other's opinions because they're not always the same. Number 4, you have the right to be heard. That means we just respect one another by listening to each other. We hear each other out. We just talked about that. Number 5, you have the right to be taken seriously. When you talk, I listen. I'm present. I don't look down on you because you're younger and you don't understand. And you don't look down on me because I'm old and I don't get it. We completely take each other seriously when we have a conversation. Number 6, you have the right to be given the benefit of the doubt. And we're going to talk about this in detail in a second, but it means I don't make assumptions. I don't judge you before I get all the information. I believe the best about you until I can't, and vice versa. Number 7, you have the right to be told the truth. See, when you ask me a question, you have the right to expect that I'm going to start with the truth. And the same thing, when I ask you, you tell me the truth. We respect each other that way. Number 8, you have the right to be consulted. When a decision gets made between two people, you have the right to be in on that decision. And when it comes to parents and kids, you let them be on the decision as much as they're capable of at their whatever age of or level of maturity that they have. But we respect each other and we consult each other when a decision gets made that affects both of us. Number 9, be imperfect and make mistakes. You have the right to make mistakes. See, because everybody in a relationship is going to mess up. Everybody's going to spill some things. They're going to forget some things. We're going to break things in this house. That's just going to happen. And so we give each other the space. And I need the room to make a mistake just as much as you do. And then finally, number 10, you have the right to courteous and honorable treatment. In other words, I should be able to expect that when you speak to me, you're not going to use your words to hurt me. And you should expect that I won't hurt you, that there won't be abuse between us, that there won't be someone using someone else for my own purposes, that you'll be treated honorably. And those 10 things, that's what respect practically looks like in a relationship. And if we're going to be peacemakers, true peacemakers, we have to start with respect. Let me give you a third skill that you need to learn. And I've already mentioned this briefly, but we're going to go into it in detail, and it's this. We can't try to read each other's minds. How many times do we do this? In other words, we make assumptions about what somebody else thinks or what somebody else feels or about what their motives are. I believe there's more conflict that gets started and more conflict that gets held on to because people are just making assumptions about each other than anything else I can think of. It always, almost always starts with that. It goes like this. You say something, you make a comment to me, and it hurts me, it offends me, or I take it a certain way. And so what do I do in that moment? I just assume that that's what you meant, right? I assume you meant to hurt me, you meant to offend me, you meant to embarrass me. But I don't ask you about it. I don't find out if that's true or if that was your motive or if that was the thinking behind it. I just assume this person meant to hurt me. And so then I start living life as if that's true, you know? I don't talk to you about it. I don't ask what you were thinking. I just assume. And so now I'm mad, I'm hurt, I'm carrying around conflict, and you probably don't even know about it because you weren't intending that in the first place. See how that works? And here's why mind reading and making assumptions is so toxic. Every time I make an assumption about someone who hurts me and I don't go and confirm it, I don't talk to them about it, what I'm basically doing is I'm believing a lie about someone in my head. And when I do that, I'm not living in reality anymore. I'm just living in my own world that I just made up in my own mind. So then I start treating you differently. I start treating you based on what I think you meant or what I assume that you were doing. And so again, I'm not treating you based on anything in reality. And then if I do that long enough, if I hold on to that long enough, I start passing that on to other people. And they start believing the assumptions. And they start treating you differently. And now everything you say, everything you do, everything I hear, I filter it through that filter. And it taints everything in our relationship. So whenever there's conflict, we have to make sure, check your assumptions. Before you go any further, before you think anything else. And I want to give you 4 steps to do this. Here's how you always can check your assumptions. Number 1, start by reflecting on what that other person thinks or feels, but they haven't said out loud, what you're assuming. In other words, get real clear in your mind. What is it that I think they think? What is it that I am assuming that they meant when they did whatever they did or when they said whatever they did? And the second step is then you just ask them. You start by saying, look, I have this assumption. Do I have permission from you to check out my assumption and make sure that what I'm thinking is right? And then you wait. And if they say yes, you move on to step 3. And you just simply say something like this. Say, well, okay, I think that you might think, or I feel like, or I'm assuming that you were thinking this when you said what you said or when you did what you did. And then you just fill in that blank with whatever it is that you're assuming. And then you ask them, am I right? Is that really what you meant to do? Or is that what you were trying to accomplish? And then you just sit back. Number 4, you just give them an opportunity to respond to that. And you listen. And if you follow this conversation guide that I'm giving you right here, that'll, I think, in a lot of relational conflicts, almost every one, it'll help you. It'll help you in any relationship. Your employees, your bosses, your spouse, your friends, your roommate, your kids, parents. Anytime there's a conflict, I'm telling you, it often comes back to the assumptions we make. But if you'll check them out first, sometimes you can prevent the conflict from ever happening in the first place, or at least going any further. Let me give you a 4th skill on this, and it is this. Clarify your expectations. How many times has a conflict gotten started, and it all goes back to something like this? You say this out loud, or you think this in your head. Well, why wouldn't they come to our family get-together? I thought we were important to them. Or, well, if I'd have known he expected me to do that, I would have never taken this job in the first place. Or how about this? He should know that if something's broken, I want it fixed. I shouldn't have to ask him to do that. Or if they really cared about me, they'd call me more often, or they'd write me more often, or they would like my posts, or whatever. Or how about this, because I've heard this one. You know, in a good church, everyone would always be there and support you when you're hurting. Now, let me just say something. When you have an expectation like the ones that I just gave you, first of all, you just need to know, you might be right. Your expectation might be a valid expectation. It might be something that you should fully be able to expect from that person in your life. Maybe there's nothing wrong with your expectation. Here's the problem. Most of the time, we expect people to know what we want and to know what we expect before we've ever said it out loud, and that's unfair. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you. In fact, let me give you the problem with most of our expectations. Most of our expectations fall into these categories. First, they're unconscious. In other words, you don't even know you have it, or at least until somebody doesn't meet your expectations. They're unrealistic, meaning a lot of times that person that you're expecting something from, they don't even have the time or the ability to meet your expectations. A lot of times they're unspoken. Like I said before, you haven't even said it out loud, but now you're mad because somebody didn't meet your expectations and you haven't said it. And they're unagreed upon. In other words, we had thoughts about what we wanted to happen, and the person we were expecting, they never agreed to that. You didn't even talk about it. So what do? Well, simple. You turn them all around. You make the unconscious conscious. You make the unrealistic realistic. You make the unspoken spoken, and you make the unagreed upon agreed upon. That's how you work through, and that's how you get through your expectations. Otherwise, if you don't do these things, you know what you have? You just have hope. You just have hope. You hope that this person is going to meet my expectations. But when you make them conscious, you say them out loud, you agree upon them, well, now you've got some realistic expectations. And you can't hold somebody responsible when all there is hope. When it's just your hopes or your dreams, you can't hold somebody else responsible for your hope. Last one, real quick. The last skill for peacemaking is this. You got to know your triggers. I'll explain it like this. Everybody knows what an allergy is, right? I mean, you have a physical allergy. You come in contact with something, or you eat something, or you touch something, and your body reacts to it, usually a negative reaction, right? And it's toxic to you. Well, the truth is we all have what you might want to call emotional allergies. Or what I mean by that is emotional or spiritual triggers. And what I mean by that, an emotional trigger or an allergy is just something that you've encountered in your past, and now when you encounter it in your present, it reminds you of that thing in your past. And whatever that thing was, it brings up emotion in you. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's hurt, maybe it's fear or frustration. I'll give you an example. Maybe you grew up with a dad who was not present very much in your family. In fact, he just pretty much checked out when it came to you and your siblings. And a lot of times he would just come home and sit in front of the TV and do nothing. And so now when your spouse comes home and he was relaxing in front of the television, you get all this emotion that just builds up in you. And sometimes you explode because it makes you angry. It brings up what you remember from the past, and it triggers that emotion in you. And so now it causes conflict between you and your spouse. Or how about this? Maybe you were lazy in school and you didn't do as well in school as you should have, and you had the ability, you just didn't do it. And it cost you a career. It cost you the college that you know you should have gone to. And you regret it every day. And you look back on that and you wished you'd have done different. But now, every time you catch your kid goofing off, you get super sensitive because you don't want to see them make the same mistakes that you did. And so you pounce on that. And sometimes you overreact emotionally when you shouldn't because of that emotion that you hold on from your past. And it's a trigger for you. For some people, there are words that trigger us. There are phrases that we hear, and they're just emotional triggers. For some of us, it's a personality type, and whenever we hang around a certain person with a certain type of personality, it just triggers all kinds of emotion. But the key is this. I could go on, but the key is this. We got to know what those are. You got to understand what your triggers are. You got to ask yourself, when you feel that emotion building up into you, why is that? What is that emotion? Am I feeling fear right now, anger right now, frustration right now? And why is it that that thing or that word or that action triggers that emotion in me? And when you can know what your triggers are, you can prepare for them so that the next time it comes around, you know exactly what's going on, and you can have a better reaction, a more loving, mature response than you did before. I want to wrap things up today, and I just want to read you one final scripture from Romans chapter 12. This is something that we can all just sort of take with us today. It says, don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see that you are honorable. And here's the final one. This is the one I want you to take home with you. Do all that you can. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. And see, now today, now that we know the difference between true peace and false peace, we can start moving away from that false peace, away from that conflict that we often carry around with us, and we can fight for, we can strive towards that real peace that Jesus said his followers could know. And here's how I want to encourage you to do it. On the back of your connection card today, there are those 5 key things that I just taught you and gave you steps on each and every one of them. And I know it's a lot of information, and it was a lot of stuff, and I get that. And I don't expect anybody to go home and put all this into practice. It's impossible. But here's what I'd encourage you to do. Look and take one of those and say, there's one area that I know that I need to work on, that I can put into practice. Maybe for you it's speaking honestly and listening openly, or listening better when you have a conversation. Maybe it's respecting better, or maybe it's not reading minds and making expectations, or whatever it might be, knowing your triggers. Whatever your thing is, I want to encourage you, take that one and say, that's what I'm going to focus on for the next 7 days. And if you let us know that on the back of your card, man, we'll pray for you this week. We'll ask God to give you the strength and the courage to fulfill that and to live that out this week as you seek for true peace and not the false peace that many of us wind up living in. Because, see, that's what spiritual adults do. So let me pray for you right now that we'll get this done. Let's bow our heads. God, I thank you for what you've taught us today. God, so many of us, we wind up deceiving ourselves, and we live in this false peace. And God, we know that that's not the life you've called us to, that you've called us to live in true peace, to become true peacemakers, to not just let the wrongs go undealt with, but God, that we would fight for truth, and we would fight for that true peace that you said was possible. So, God, I pray that through what we've learned today, we would hold on to at least one thing that we can do. And that, God, you would provide us with the strength to do it through your Spirit, and we can become peacemakers this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.